So I'm going to speak about the transformation, journey of my transformation, wherein I will be explaining that how I transformed from being a communist to the so-called the right wing. Per se, I don't see that we have got a left wing or a right wing in India, because we all have to pursue the righteousness for the country or the dharma for the country. And if I go back to my story, it all started when I was born. I was born in a very cosmopolitan family. When I say a cosmopolitan family, it's a setup of people who have got very different ideologies, who have got very different practices. As in, a few of my family members are adherent follower of RSS, and few of them are very left-oriented people who are adherent communist. But at the same time, the difference which was happening throughout my journey was my father. My father is a professor of history, and he has been giving me the insights of different kind of political movements which ever happened throughout from the time of independence and also in the past. So it used to be the days when on every Friday I used to be going to the nearby mosque to offer my prayers to the Sufi, and also I would be offering the chadar. It's a very normal trend which is practiced on every Friday in the mosque. That apart, I was also part of most of the Sunday prayers in churches, and I also visited gurudwaras. And yes, being a very devout Hindu family too, my days used to start with the puja which used to happen at the home, and the evening used to be spent with the Ramayana and Mahabharata narration with my grandmother. But of all these, the changes started to happen in my life once I entered the architecture school. And many of us are not aware of the fact, but architecture schools somehow are the place which are hub of a lot of pseudo-liberals. I would like to use this term, because every one of us are trying to portray us in a frame of mind that whatever practice we will be portraying will be very much on a left-centric lines, because most of the art movements which we are taught in the architecture school are very much left-centric. So the moment you enter architecture school, the subject which you are introduced to is history of architecture. This is perhaps one of the subjects which can take a toll of whole of your architecture career. Though many of the architects don't believe that history of architecture ever had an impact on their life, but it really had. If I go to the module of the syllabus which is taught to us on daily basis, Le Corbusier happens to be the fountainhead of architecture for most of us. And when I say Le Corbusier is the fountainhead of architecture, then it goes back to the Chandigarh city. And all of us know that Chandigarh is a very new city. It's a very new Indian city, which was to be designed as a replacement for Lahore. Lahore, if someone goes back to the history of Lahore, one will know that it was one of the most vibrant, cosmopolitan and colorful city, which was full of colors. It represented India in each and every nooks and corners. But did we achieve the same thing when Chandigarh was designed? So for this, I will need to give a bit of background to you of how and why Chandigarh was designed the way it is. As I already said, that Chandigarh was supposed to be the replacement of Lahore as a city. But we got a city as an entity, but somehow we lost the essence of Lahore, because Le Corbusier, the man, was the most influential professional of his time. He was considered to be a man who changed the world drastically because of his architectural and planning creations. With himself, he brought in concrete to India, and he painted whole of Chandigarh using the concrete as a material. But at the same time, today also, when I look back at Chandigarh as a city, it seems like a place which should be working very appropriately in terms of planning. Now the question arises is that why are we liking it as a good city? It's all about our current perspective. Le Corbusier was a man who was very fond of automobiles. And because he was fond of automobiles, the city was designed in a way that it will always pursuit of the happiness of one who is going to drive automobiles. Nowadays we draw automobiles, and that's the reason why the planning of the Chandigarh cities looks so fascinating to us. But we have failed to understand that how a city or Indian city needs to work as. If the first architect who was commissioned to design Chandigarh was Albert Mayer. Albert Mayer was an American architect, but and the initial plan which he drew for the Chandigarh city was not the same as what we see today, though it may be similar in the plan terms of zoning, but it was more of a curvilinear, more of organic nature, which goes back to how actually even our Indian cities grow. Because organicity or the fluidity is somehow the basic of every Indic or Bharatiya or Sanatan or any culture or identity which you speak about. So our cities too grew in that way. But the gridiron pattern somehow killed the organic nature of the city, and at the same time it became the fountainhead of how the more of the architecture will be perceived in the days to come by. Going back to the situation of the architecture school, when we were being taught about Le Corbusier, and even if now you talk to any young architecture bud or a student, he will be more fascinated to design something like Le Corbusier. His all design concepts, all the references will somehow be going back to the modernist idea of Le Corbusier. And when I say modernism, maybe that many people who are not connected with the art and architecture as a profession may not understand modernism, but modernism was a notion which came out as a reaction to the surrealistic idea. Surrealistic idea was an idea where even in all the art practices you look to see the expression. You look to see that there is some divinic extent which exists among the creation what you are doing. But the modernistic ideas were more about the rationality, where you talk about the functions, where you talk about the straight lines. Even now if I give something to you to design, your first idea would be that how can you use even a single square feet of a design, and henceforth all the buildings and all the creation started becoming the boxes. And somehow boxes is not a human nature. Everything is organic, isn't it? You can't even find a single thing in nature which is exactly a straight line. But it came with Le Corbusier came the idea of modernism, and it became to be used across over India. And like I said, most of the architecture students are too fascinated about Le Corb, because the first thing which goes into academia is the ideas of Le Corbusier and other architects who are working on the similar lines. With this, what generally happens is that we tend to neglect the real history of architecture, what would have existed in our land. When you are taught about temple architecture, or rather I will say Hindu architecture, it's only it would cover a semester. Yes, it covers a semester, but what we are taught only is the plans of the Garbhagriha's and the plans of how a temple will be flowing. So if I ask you that is temple architecture only about understanding how the plans or the zoning of a temple works? No, it's not so. So for this, I like to quote one of the incidences or the occurrences which in fact changed my life. And it is way after I had graduated. I was on a study trip with my students. That time I was teaching in an architecture school, and it was in Aurangabad. And we came up in Ajanta caves. So while I entered the Ajanta caves, I found a very fascinating and very indifferent situations. In most of the caves, you walk in, you step up, you have got a podium kind of scenario in most of the caves, but Ajanta caves are a bit indifferent. You walk for 3 feet and you dip down for a step, and you further dip down for another step. I asked the guide that what's the reason? Why do you have a depression within the cave? Then he was like, he didn't have a direct answer, but later on I got in touch with the local architect of that place, Professor Deshpande. Professor Deshpande kind of narrated me the tale that why that ditch used to exist. Now, most of the people at first might think that that may be a ritualistic thing because of which that ditch used to exist. But it was very scientific in nature, and it baffled me. Because even when I'm going to tell you, maybe that even you will be baffled about what the story exists behind it. It used to be there to do the paintings. When I say to do the paintings, it comes to the fact that most of the paintings were done by using the organic colors. Organic colors were taken out from the plants, And the only source of light back then used to be the fire, and the caves are the dark places. So when caves are the dark places and you need light, then what will be the source of light? It was definitely going to be fire, nothing else. And when you have put the organic colors to do the painting, and you are using fire as a source of light to do the painting, then carbon will definitely destroy the paintings, isn't it? You can try it out even today. Anything done by organic paint will be destroyed. But what actually was the fact? They used to store water in those ditches. And we know that the law of reflection is attributed to Mr. Snell, and that's why we called it the Snell's law. But it was back then in 2200 years back that monks were using the laws of reflection. The light used to be incident onto those water stored on those ditches, and the light used to generate enormous amount of light, and that is how they used to do the painting. This was the time when I was communist. And when I say communist, I won't say that I was communist to pursue any political career or to pursue any political thought. For me, communist was being skeptical. If you go to the base of communism, the base is being skeptical. You have to be rational. That's what modernism was all about when I spoke about the buildings of Le Corbusier. So if you are skeptical, and when you realize that monks were doing some scientific works 2200 years back, then you will feel like, hey, I need to read more about it, and you will start to pursue more about the facts related to anything which existed there. So once I realized that there was some science related to the Ajanta caves, I thought of collecting the books of ASI, but I will come back to this later. I will again go back to the architecture school, that what else was happening and what made me communist. So this was one fact, that definitely Hindu architecture or my own architecture was not being taught to us. We were taught about the Gothic architecture, we were taught about the Islamic architecture, but yes, there was no Hindu architecture or Bharatiya architecture. So what would happen with a student if he is being given those feats? Because the concept of design are being drawn out of the modernist ideas, which are about rationality. In the history of architecture, you are being taught about everything but not the Hindu architecture. And what next used to happen is that if I as a student or someone as a student, someone can try even today, try out a Hindu concept or a concept of Vastu Shastra in design, then he may be ridiculed in architecture school. But if he takes an Arabian concept or the concept from the land of Arabs or from a concept of West, then it will be appreciated as a new design concept as a starter. So generally a student who has never got a bent of mind that what exactly was a fact, when he doesn't believe that there is some problem with the other side of the faith or something, when you are not living with certain dogmatic views, then you will subscribe to an idea that yes, Hindu thoughts were bad. And that somehow kind of was superimposed so heavily upon me. And by then, because I was too interested in literature, what I picked, the literature where the Das Kapital used to be like a Bible for me, and it was like it always needs to walk beside me. It was like if I today subscribe to Bhagavad Gita, that time it was completely Karl Marx's Das Kapital. Apart from that, I had read all the 9 pieces of literature of Stalin. I was getting set to become a perfect urban Naxal, if I have to say, and I would say that most of my designs were getting very much inspired by the communist ideas. Now I will relate you back to what is the communist idea about the architecture. I believe that all of you would have seen the ugly looking buildings of Russia, how ugly they look, the concrete buildings. And why they were built that way? They were built that way because everyone was in quest to show their power. Everyone was trying to create another monument. And yes, concrete was a material. Concrete was a material which would give you any form, any shape. And also it was a material of superiority. Still, even now, like right now I'm sitting in Ahmedabad, and if you look around the buildings, there are many concrete and brick buildings. If you go to the University of CEPT, one of the best colleges of architecture in India, there you will find the so-called brutalist architecture. We use the term brutalist, and brutal, everyone knows what brutal means, and actually they were brutal. They were trying to convey something else. It was more about power, it was more about imposition. Yes, my India was not about imposition. Yeah, so when my concept was being drawn from the communist ideas, my literature was that of Stalin and Karl Marx, then what else do you expect for me to become later on? And the first piece of literature I wrote back then was during the 4th year of my architecture school. It was called Restart, an architect's journey to the Parliament House. Again, I would say that it was not a bad pitch, because my intention was not to become, I would not like to take names, but there are many who pursue the idea of communism and wanted to become politician, and we know what happened to them in the recent election. But that apart, again my focus through that literature was also to pursue a better India. I saw that perhaps communism is a solution to India. Communism or the so-called Marxism can solve out my problem. And it can, and if I again go back to my childhood, one thing I missed to tell you people about is that I was very fascinated about flags, whether it is the red flag of the Marx, or rather the communism, or whether it's the Bhagwa flag of RSS, or it's my tricolor. Everything used to give me some goosebumps. And as I said that my family was very cosmopolitan. Few of my relatives used to subscribe to the idea of the communists, and few were adherent Shakha going people. And I used to visit Shakha on every Vijay Dashmi. I used to go salute the red flag on every 1st of the May. And definitely tricolor was the ritual on the 26th of the Jan and the 15th August. It used to 5th in the morning, when I would just go around on the 15th August and 26th of the August, 26th of the January, and I would dig the earth so that I could fix the flag, and that is how my day used to start. So even despite being inclined toward the idea of communism, I had that love for the motherland, or the mother India, or the nation which I belong to. Now I will get you back to my architecture school, where I wrote this book, The Restart, an Architect's Journey to Parliament House. This book was about telling the students or the young people that, hey, you need to be active in politics, because no one is apolitical. This is the only one line of Kanhaiya Kumar which I always agree with him. He had once said that no one is apolitical, that you are political the day you are born. Yes, we all are political. You can't be apolitical. And I always believe that if you want to make a change in the system, you need to be in the system. If you want to bring out some enormous transformation or reforms, you need to be the part of the system. So with that perspective, I wrote that book. But there was something else which was going to happen with the time. And came the 2011, and we all came across the anti-corruption movement, the so-called Anna Hazare movement. Though if someone goes back to the fact, which I realized later on, that the movement was actually a hijacked one, which was actually initiated by Raji Dikshit ji and Ramdev Baba, which was also called Jan Swabhiman Andolan. I am missing the name, I missed the name, but it was actually initiated by Raji Dikshit ji and Ramdev Baba. But whatever it may be, this India was completely into the anti-corruption movement. They were ready to throw the corrupts out. And that is where the whole pitara of the grand old party started opening up. We started knowing about each and every corruption one by one. It was all in the open. It was all open library to know that how the corrupt the Congress was. People perhaps had forgot about what happened during emergency in the era of the 70s. But again, when the corruption opened up, people thought that, you know, these guys need to be thrown out. There is no option that we can stick with the Congress. And with that time emerged a new leader who was my hero that time. It was it was Arvind Kejriwal. I always considered him to be my hero because I saw him more competent than other. There used to be a one post used to be very viral on social media back then, comparing Rahul Gandhi with Arvind Kejriwal in terms of qualifications and in terms of the attributes both of them hold. And even today, if you compare them in terms of qualification, definitely Arvind Kejriwal goes way higher. But was he supposed to be my hero? The question was that why did I choose Arvind Kejriwal over other? We had three options back then. Either you go with the Congress, or you go with the BJP, or you go with the so-called new hero, that is Arvind Kejriwal. For me, the image of BJP was quite a malign one. It was not a good one. I saw that they are going to divide India on the communal lines, because what I heard is that what transpired on the 6th of December in 1992 was somewhat very bad. The so-called Babri Mosque, or the alleged mosque, was broken, and communal disharmony occurred in India. And BJP and RSS was considered to be one of the major transpirer of the thing what happened back then. So for a kid like me, I would say that I was a kid back then too, and for a kid like me, it was never a good idea to subscribe to a party ideology which supports communal disharmony. So I choose to go with someone who is more intellectual, who can give more feed to the country, who is anti-corruption, and definitely the corrupt Congress was never going to be my option. But with the time, things started changing. The time was changing a lot, and during the 2014 Lok Sabha election, Arvind Kejriwal decided to contest Lok Sabha election too, and he resigned from the post of the chief minister. And many of the people told me that, you know, your hero is is not following the right direction, and perhaps he's not going to be good for the country. But I still stick to my foot and said that, oh, he's doing it just because to pursue a larger spread in the country. And definitely, if the anti-corruption crusader comes for the country, it will definitely give better prospects. But 2014 election came. I wish that Arvind Kejriwal defeats Narendra Modi in 2014, and but it didn't happen, and he lost the worst he could. But I was very sad that my hero lost, and I had not voted for Narendra Modi. I had voted for Arvind Kejriwal back then. So, but by then I had already been to the Ajanta caves, as I said. Somehow the transformation has started happening with me, but I was not sure if the idea of BJP is really going to save my country, or it's going to give a way better than what Congress had given. For this, I was required to understand that what BJP stands for. I needed to understand their core agenda of what is Hindutva. I needed to understand that what was the Babri Mosque all about, and what actually happened on the 6th of December 1992. So with that, the first thing what I did was that what any skeptical mind should do. Today also there are many skeptics, so-called skeptics or the rationalist or the communist, who talk about that something bad happened on 6th of December. But I have a question for them. Have they read the whole of a document of Allahabad High Court, or the report which is published on the judgment in 2010? If someone reads it, the whole pages, they will get the whole history of what actually happened in Ayodhya back from the time of 16th century to the recent times. If one goes through the document completely, we'll come to know that there is no trace of mosque till the 17th of the century. There was no mosque. And the first appearance of mosque happens in the 19th century, as per the historical records of the foreign travelers. Perhaps the mosque was proposed back then, but it was constructed later. But there are many other things which just started revealing once I started going through the documents. And the other document which really helped me later on was the work of Meenakshi Jain ji. That was again a big eye-opener. It made me realize that, you know, maybe that the way it happened on 6th December was not right. That we can have a different debate over it. But what stood over there was definitely not right, because how can you have an image of an invader superimposing the image of the Sri Ram, who once upon a time was even called Imam-e-Hind by someone who later on became the fountainhead of Pakistan, that is Allana Muhammad Iqbal. So, in fact, what I am trying to implicate is that back then Ram was considered like a cultural ethos of India. Maryada Purushottam is all about what India should stand as. He is the most ideal man, and definitely Babur was of no competence. He stands no close to where our Ram stands. So I was very clear that BJP's stance or the RSS stand of getting Ram temple over there is very appropriate, and we must have it by hook or by crook. Now, the next thing what I really needed to understand was the idea of Hindutva, what it is all about, because all I could hear from my secular friends and the people around is that Hindutva is nothing but an idea derived out of fascism. It's an idea based on the race. It's an idea which will divide India, and it's an idea which later on got to be coined as Hindu terror or the saffron terror or Bhagwa terror. So this was very important to decode, because these were the keywords: Hindu terror, Bhagwa Atankvad, which was really making me refrain from subscribing to the idea of RSS, BJP and Hindutva as a core. Now, when I started reading about the subject, and I got a lot of references from my father. My father is a historian, and he always used to give me a lot of feeds. Though till now he teaches what the academics allows him to, which is completely pro-Marxist. But he, whenever in private, whenever he used to converse with me, he used to give me the right side of the history too. And then I started understanding the word Hindu as a starter, because Hindutva is combination of two words, Hindu jod twa, which in English translates as Hinduness. Now, what is Hindu? What is Twa? It's very essential to understand Hindutva because words mean something. Hindu stands for, the term Hindu was first time coined by Darius I. It's found in 6th century BC inscription of Darius I, where he talks about the Hinduan as a people who lived beyond the river Sindh. Perhaps it was because of the river Sindh, and there are many further historical documents which gives the definition of Hindu. But there is no such mention of any word Hindu before that. But whatever it may be, Hindu literally meant the people who lived beyond the river Sindhu as a starter. Now, Twa, what does Twa stands for? Twa is nothing but ness. Or for this, I will like to use two more comparative. We often use the word feminism and Naritwa. While feminism can stand for a movement, while Naritwa is the essence of being Nari, it's two very distinct factors which we need to understand. When I say Hinduism, and again, I don't know if many people know it or not, but term Hinduism for the first time was coined only in 19th century. It never existed before. For this, I will like to take you a bit, maybe it's a bit off the track, but we need to know that what the hell this ism is. Because most of the Brahmanism, and we have got a lot of ism which exists in our time of now. So, for ism, because I'm an architect, so I will give you reference from architecture. We talk about the art movements, and it is from there that basically ism starts to flourish strongly. We have term called deconstructivism, we have term called postmodernism, we have term called modernism. So ism is nothing but a state of a movement, or it subscribes to only singular idea. You cannot mix deconstructivism with modernism. Both are two different aspects altogether. Why modernism is all about straight lines, deconstructivism is about crooked geometry in architecture. So they cannot be merged. Those two are very distinct ideas. So when I say Hinduism, so at times, though now it has become a popular term and we may not be able to ever replace it, I am not even subscribing to the idea that we should replace it. But if I go to the linguistic sense of it, perhaps Hinduism is not at all the right definition, because what it does is that it kind of confines Hindu to a very singularistic idea, like decon plus ism makes deconstructivism, modern plus ism makes modernism. So Hindu plus ism makes Hinduism. Hindu is not a singular idea. It had included the idea of Astikas as well as Nastika, and further it can further branch down to many ideas. And because we were pluralistic in nature, I am again going a bit off track because it's important to understand this word very properly so that we can really make other unaware people aware about it. We were very pluralistic in nature. We have got the story of Raja Dahir. Raja Dahir went on to war for some foreign people, in fact the descendants of Prophet Muhammad. And we also have a story that I don't have very strong evidences for it, but yes, there are stories that Cheraman Mosque, which is in the southern part, which near to Cochin, happens to be the second mosque of the world. There is debate whether it was second or third, but certainly it was one of the mosques which was built in 632 AD. It was built for the travelers who came down in the south. So we accommodated them. Why did we accommodate them? Because by the time they came in, we already had the faiths like Buddhism, we already had the faiths like Jainism, we already had many other faiths which were existing. So we thought that no problem, you want to worship someone in a different way, you are all welcome, because that is what Hinduism, that's the word we exist. So Hinduism is all about, or that's what the Sanatan idea is about. And so had Raja Dahir been of the same idea what they used to persecute the Parsis back then, Raja Dahir won't have gone to on a war with them. We subscribe to the idea of pluralism. So for the existence of India, the term ism doesn't go well. And for the existence of Hinduism, because it's a popular word, we have to use it. Perhaps ism was never a good idea. Rather, Hinduness or Sanatan Dharma explains it all more than it, and there can be debate on it. But I was very clear that what my Hindutva was about. So if Hindutva was clear, then how the subscriber of those ideas can be wrong? How can RSS be wrong, or how can, for that matter, BJP be wrong? And how can, and as I explained earlier, that there was nothing wrong to ask for the Ram temple at the site where we believe that Rama was born. Then I was very clear, I was understanding now that BJP is the party which I need to align with for now, because it's right for India. And then as the government progressed, and the things further kept on happening. But I will just take you back to the time when I spoke about the Ajanta caves. After I left from the Ajanta caves, I had collected few documents or the books. We have got a small store just in the beginning of the Ajanta Caves complex. It's the store of the ASI, and you can get few books. So what you will get in only ASI books, nothing else would be available. So I collected few of the books, and fortunately all the ASI books have got footnotes and references. So references will take you to the Buddhist literature, and once you start going to the Buddhist literature, you will be taken back to the Upanishads and the Puranas, and that was happening with me. And then I was thrown back to Upanishads and the Puranas, and then I read the Rig Veda as a starter. The first thing which I read was the Griffith's translation of the Rig Veda, which certainly is not very authentic. There are a lot of flaws in it when it comes to the topics like the cow meat and other aspects. Many communist ideas have often used the quotations, have often quoted Griffith stating that Rig Veda talks about the cow meat. But if you look for the actual translation, it will mean something else. But whatever, the first idea which I subscribed to was the Griffith, because I had to start somewhere. Because the last I had remembrance of Sanskrit was only from the school days. But I had to get the right things. I started reading Sanskrit again. I started reading the Vyakaran of Sanskrit, and I started reading Rig Veda interpretation of Dayananda Saraswati. And with that, I came to know that it gave me very strong reference to first start believing that yes, Aryan invasion theory is a myth. Whole concept or the narrative constructed by the communists are totally flawed. Because Rig Veda talks 65 times about river Saraswati. River Saraswati, with the recent dating and scientific evidences, is known that it started drying in 22,000 BCE. Started drying, I'm not saying it dried that time. So, as per many eminent historians, Aryans came to India somewhere between 2000 to 1500 BC. So if Aryans came to India in 2000 to 1500 BC, did they have a time machine that they wrote about river Saraswati which started drying some 2000 years back, 20,000 years back? Because Rig Veda talks about river Saraswati as a very mighty river. It had started drying in 22,000 BCE. So by 1500 BCE, it was completely gone. So even when they are writing about the river Saraswati in 1500 BC, or as per the Max Muller around 1200 BCE, then they would write river Saraswati, but they will not write it was a very strong river and it was a big river and the way it used to exist back then. Apart from that, it also talks about Sindhu. Many people say that Sindhu is nothing but the collection, they used to use the term Sindhu for water bodies, but Rig Veda uses term Sindhu in two distinct ways, one in a pluralistic ways and one in a singular way. Where it's singular, it's talking about the Sindhu river, so it's talking about Sindhu river, it's talking about Saraswati river, but it's not talking about Thames. It's not talking about any river which is in the west. So what was the problem with these Aryans? That they never wrote anything about the geography of the west if they came from there. No one wants to leave the trace of the place where they belong to. So I just gave you one of the points which was a strong indicator for me to study further. And then I started researching and studying further, and for me Aryan invasion theory was completely gone. Now, in the current scenario of the Indian political system, I do live in southern part of country right now, and there are very eminent Dravidian parties which exist, and somehow they used to subscribe to the Periyar's ideology, and when I say the Periyar ideology, it was a left ideology. Now here it becomes very interesting, because When you are left leaning, I told earlier that you need to be skeptical. Being skeptical is only the core of being leftist or a communist. And I say that I was a proud leftist, that means I was skeptical. Unfortunately, these leftists are not at all skeptical, they are dogmatic. They are more superstitious. So, because if Aryan invasion theory was a myth, and there was nothing called Dravida race, because again, if I explain the word Dravid was a term used by Adi Shankaracharya when he was in debate with Madan Mishra, when he used the term Dravid Shishu, wherein he wants to explain that I come from the southern part of the country, the peninsular belt. That is how the word Dravid became popular. It was not at all about the race. So, but the Periyar and the follower used the term Dravid to imply about the race. So, how can such a myth be the name of a left-leaning party? The skeptical party. Skeptics don't use the lie. They are all wrong. So, so it really implies that left somehow is one of the most dogmatic organization, or anyone who leans to the left currently in our country are very dogmatic or very superstitious. They are picking up the ideas from the West, but they are not understanding India or understanding Bharat. On a contrast, if you look to the leftist or the communist of the China, they are hyper nationalist. If you go to America, even the leftists over there, they appreciate country more, but there is some problem with the left of our country. And if I quote Karl Marx over here, because I used to love the works of Karl Marx, I still love his works, I won't deny that. He said that religion, I am paraphrasing him, religion is the opium of the oppressed. When he meant this, when he said this, he perhaps meant the right one, because if you want to know what he said, you need to know that what was the religious situation of the West back then, because he said it in the context of the West. Back then, the churches were very powerful forces in Germany. Churches were practicing a lot of dogmatic ideas too. So, was he wrong when he said that religion is the opium of the oppressed? Because it was being governed by the priests were being governed by the royals. So perhaps he was right in the West. But he didn't see the Bharat. So maybe he was right. So, but our communist just cherry picked this idea and tried to imply it. Because again, dharma and religion are very different. While dharma comes from, the root word of dharma is dhri. Dhri means to hold. And it means to go in accordance with the reet. When I say reet, Raghukul reet sada chali aayi, reet is the term wherein you say the idea of the rightfulness or truthfulness. There are various meanings, and in fact, one can have a complete lecture on the dharma as a word itself. It's such a wide topic. But broadly speaking, dharma is nothing but the idea to dhri, hold, and the reet means to the righteousness. So we never and religion is for me, how I have defined religion in my book is that religion is something which is an institution. It is based on a doctrine. So there comes a distinction. While dharma is very natural, anyone will never ever say his kid to do a wrong deed. It is a dharma. But when it comes to religion, it is always followed with the reference to a book, a doctrine. We never had a doctrine. That's why we had a concept called Smriti. Smriti is something which changes with the time. Yes, our communists never subscribed to the idea of the Bharat, and that's why they started failing drastically, because they were not able to. Had India been communist in the time of when the second mosque of the world, Cheraman, was built, maybe we won't have included them, because then we would have said that there is no divinity, then what's the place of another divine thing to come in? So India became pluralistic. We accommodated other religions only because we were non-communist. So yes, coming back to the BJP's stance, I was very clear that the party I should currently stand with is BJP, and maybe that Narendra Modi is the right man to go with, because his ideas were working so well. And also with the same time I got influenced, or I won't use the word influence, I got enlightened with the work of Madhu Kishwar later on, where she wrote elaborately about what exactly happened in Gujarat. Because one reason why I didn't like Narendra Modi, and if you read the back part of my book, that you will know that the reason what I mentioned why I hated Narendra Modi was perhaps maybe that was the reason for most of the people. Everyone saw him as a mass murderer. I am saying in open, this was my perspective too. But the literature of Madhu Kishwar opened up my ideas. I came to know what had actually happened in Gujarat. And also the court had given a complete clearance to Narendra Modi. Despite, and for us, for a person of rationality to stand in India, if you say that I will not listen to the court for very clear judgments, then there is something is wrong with people. The communists have been cherry picking the points, but for me, I always subscribe to the idea if a court has given a judgment, I have to pick it. I will rather challenge it, but I will not go against it. I had to stand with the court. I went ahead with the evidences given by Madhu Kishwar, and even image of Narendra Modi was very clear for me. BJP was clear, RSS was clear, Narendra Modi was clear. Congress was the most corrupt. I don't want to speak about the past. Past is even horrible, because if I go into the nuclear dealing and what happened with America, and we were supposed to become a nuclear empowered back in late 1950s, but Nehru refused it, and also we refused a seat in the UN. So things have been there in the past, and the most corrupt is there, and image of Arvind Kejriwal was already diminished, and we all know it's all in the open book right now. And if one reads my book, I have given a detailed account of what actually went wrong with the Aam Aadmi Party, because in fact I had donated my 75% of my salary to Aam Aadmi Party, and I was a volunteer for them, and I believed in the man. So if I have been a bit off from the organization, then certainly something was there, and the literature will definitely help you to know more about it. And yes, and in the recent times we have seen that how our policies, foreign policies have changed with the time. The right-centric party, the so-called right-centric party, has given a blue nose to the Pakistan every now and then. How we dealt with, if you look at the policies of our government currently, I'm not here to speak more about the government, but why I'm speaking here is, it's more about my stand and more of my transformation. And I see it as an essential part, because it's very important to subscribe to a political idea for the time or any time which takes your country ahead. One shouldn't shy of tomorrow to even tell that Narendra Modi has done wrong or BJP has done wrong if it's not going right for country. So, but going back to the policies, it was all set the day Narendra Modi was sworn in as the Prime Minister in 2014. The time he called Nawaz Sharif for the swearing in ceremony, that was the start of how we removed the 370 back then. So the planning was going on from 6 years. That is what my perspective is. And how we dealt with the Balakot and how we did the surgical strike. They are all great examples of how the government has really taken a strong stand against one of the enemies, which works on a very different policy. Many people still believe with the idea that maybe Aman ki Asha is the right thing. But again, it's a very further intense topic to discuss upon. But to give you a glimpse of it, that why it will never work is that Pakistan is a very complex land, and because though it comes up with being a democratic country, but it's indirectly always governed by the army, and army is indirectly governed by the religious extremists who like Hafiz Saeed and many others. And what do you expect from an army of a country whose motto itself is a religious one, when they say that we are the warriors of the God, and when someone goes out to fight in the name of God, then definitely you can't deal with a country whose complete policy has been to be the warrior for the God. So somehow I see that the way we have isolated Pakistan and the way we have been dealing with the scenarios, the way Abhinandan came back, and the day actually Abhinandan walked in, I was full of tears, because all I remembered was Captain Saurav Kalia. All I remembered that had our government been strong, had our policies been that strong enough with Pakistan, then maybe that even we would have got Saurav Kalia back too. It was the force of this government, the diplomatic works and the ideas which could isolate Pakistan and which could set a parameter wherein today work looks at India differently and Pakistan differently, and we will further grow with the time to come. So to sum it up, yes, I have been through a transformation, I have seen the red phase of the politics, as people say, and I am on now currently, they say that I am seeing the saffron phase of it. Well, it doesn't matter. I will keep on working for country, and with this perspective and the note, I end it up here. It's all for the Bharat. Jai Hind.